The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late September 1884, and when Josephine Crawford stepped off the dusty stagecoach in San Jose, California, she could barely stand upright after the grueling 2-week journey from Ohio. The cowboy waiting for her at the station, Zachary Zimmerman, felt his breath catch in his throat not from admiration, but from shock at the way her body curved unnaturally to the left, her spine twisted like a sapling bent by relentless wind. Zachary removed his hat, holding it against his chest as he approached the young woman who clutched a worn carpetbag in both hands. Her face was pretty enough, with soft features and brown eyes that held a weariness beyond her 22 years, but the way she stood, one shoulder significantly higher than the other, told a story of hardship he had not anticipated. He was 26 himself, a rancher with 300 acres of decent land and a house he had built with his own hands, but he had never imagined his mail-order bride would arrive looking so fragile. "Miss Crawford?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Yes," she replied, and her voice was steady despite the obvious pain etched around her mouth. "You must be Mr. Zimmerman." "Zachary, please," he said, reaching for her bag. She hesitated before relinquishing it, and he noticed how her hands trembled slightly. "Welcome to San Jose. I have a wagon waiting just over there." The ride to his ranch took nearly an hour, and Josephine sat stiffly beside him on the bench seat, her body swaying with each rut in the road. Zachary tried to make conversation, pointing out landmarks and neighboring properties, but she responded with only brief acknowledgments. He wondered if she was disappointed in what she saw, or if she was simply too exhausted to engage. When they finally reached his property, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills, casting everything in golden light. The house was modest but well built, with a wide front porch and windows that caught the evening glow. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings, and beyond those the land stretched toward distant tree lines. "This is it," Zachary said, setting the brake. "It is not much, but it is home." Josephine looked at the house, then at the land, and something shifted in her expression. "There is no creek nearby," she said quietly. "Where is the water?" "About a quarter-mile that way," Zachary pointed east. "There is a good stream that runs year-round. I haul barrels of it up here every few days." He saw her face fall, saw the way her shoulders sagged even further, and he realized she understood what this meant for her. As his wife, the water hauling would become her responsibility. It was woman's work on the frontier, the endless task of keeping the household supplied with enough water for cooking, cleaning, washing, and drinking. "I see," she said softly. They climbed down from the wagon, and Zachary carried her bag inside. The house was clean but sparse, furnished with handmade furniture and little in the way of decoration. He showed her the bedroom, the kitchen, and the sitting area, noting how she took it all in with those weary eyes. "I know this is not what you might have hoped for," he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "I did not come here with illusions, Mr. Zimmerman. I came because I had no other choice." Her honesty was startling. "My parents died last year. My brother inherited the farm and made it clear I was no longer welcome. I could have tried to find work in the city, but with this," she gestured to her twisted spine, "no one would hire me for anything but the most wretched positions. Your advertisement seemed like the best option available to me." Zachary felt something tighten in his chest. "I am sorry for your losses, and for what it is worth, I am glad you came. I need a wife and you need a home. Perhaps we can make something decent of this arrangement." "Perhaps," she echoed, but she did not sound convinced. They were married the next morning by the local magistrate, a quick ceremony with 2 witnesses pulled in from the street. Josephine wore the same travel-worn dress she had arrived in, and Zachary wore his cleanest shirt and vest. When it was done, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife, bound by law but strangers in every other sense. The reality of her new life set in immediately. That first afternoon, Josephine discovered that the water barrel in the kitchen was nearly empty. She found 2 wooden buckets by the back door and, without asking Zachary for help, set off toward the stream he had pointed out the day before. The walk itself was not terrible, a well-worn path through scrub grass and scattered oaks, but when she reached the water and bent to fill the first bucket, the pain in her back flared hot and sharp. She gritted her teeth and filled it anyway, then the second, and began the return journey. The buckets were heavy, each holding several gallons of water, and she had to stop every few yards to rest. Her spine protested with every step, the weight pulling at her unevenly, forcing her to lean hard to the right to compensate for the twist in her torso. By the time she reached the house, tears streamed down her face, though she wiped them away quickly before Zachary could see. She poured the water into the barrel and immediately headed back for another trip. She would need at least 4 more loads to fill it properly. Zachary was working in the barn when he glanced out and saw her making her 3rd trip, her gait uneven and labored. He had been shoeing one of his horses, but he set down his tools and walked to the edge of the barn, watching as she struggled up the slight incline to the house. The buckets swung heavily at her sides, water sloshing over the rims, and her entire body was bent with the effort. Something in his gut twisted. He had known she would have to haul water, had accepted it as part of the natural division of labor on a ranch, but seeing her actual suffering was different from abstract knowledge. He turned back to his work, telling himself that she would adjust, that her body would strengthen with time, but the image of her twisted spine stayed with him. That night, Josephine could barely move. She prepared a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, moving around the kitchen with visible difficulty, and when they sat down to eat, she could not hide the way her hands shook as she lifted her fork. "You made 6 trips today," Zachary said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "I did not think you noticed." "I notice more than you might think." He hesitated, then asked, "How long have you been like this? With your back?" Josephine set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "It started when I was 14. We had a small farm and there was no close water source. I hauled water every day, sometimes 10 or 12 trips. Over the years, it just got worse. The doctor in town said the constant strain bent my spine and now it cannot be fixed. Does it hurt all the time?" "Yes," she admitted, "but it is worse after hauling water." Zachary looked down at his plate, a plan already forming in his mind. "You should rest tomorrow. I will handle the water." "That is not necessary," she protested. "It is my responsibility. You are my wife and you can barely stand. Rest tomorrow, that is final." She wanted to argue, he could see it in her eyes, but exhaustion won out. She nodded and returned to her meal in silence. That night, they retired to separate rooms. Zachary had given her the bedroom and made himself a pallet in the sitting area, telling her they would take their time getting to know each other before sharing a bed. She had seemed relieved by this, though she had not said as much. As Zachary lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, he thought about the woman in the next room. He had expected a wife who could work alongside him, who could manage the household while he managed the land. Instead, he had a woman broken by the very work she was supposed to do. He should have felt cheated, should have been angry at the situation, but instead, he felt something else entirely. Something that might have been compassion, or perhaps the first stirrings of protectiveness. He had always been good with his hands, good at solving practical problems. Surely there was a solution to this one. The next morning, Zachary rode into San Jose and spent several hours at the general store and the blacksmith. asking questions and buying supplies. The proprietors thought he was crazy, but he paid in cash and they were happy to take his money. He returned to the ranch with a wagon full of iron pipes, joints, valves, and a small hand pump. Josephine watched from the porch as he unloaded everything, confusion clear on her face. "What is all this?" "A project," he said simply. "Don't worry about it. There is water in the barrel. I filled it this morning." Over the next 2 weeks, Zachary worked with single-minded determination. He rode out to the stream every morning before dawn and did not return until after dark. Josephine tried to ask what he was doing, but he deflected her questions, telling her only that he was working on something that would help. She used the time to explore the house more thoroughly, to learn the rhythms of the ranch. She discovered that Zachary raised cattle primarily, along with a few horses and some chickens. He employed 2 ranch hands who came by daily to help with the livestock, but they lived in town and did not stay for meals. She began cooking for everyone, preparing lunch that she brought out to wherever they were working, and the men were grateful for the hot food. The ranch hands, 2 brothers named Miguel and Carlos Hernandez, were kind to her, tipping their hats and thanking her politely, never staring at her crooked spine the way so many people did. She appreciated their discretion. "Your husband is doing something strange down by the creek," Miguel told her one afternoon as she handed him a plate of stew. "He is digging a long trench all the way up to the house." "Is he?" Josephine tried to sound unconcerned, but her curiosity was fierce. "He would not say what it is for," Carlos added, "but he is working very hard. We offered to help, but he said no." That evening, when Zachary finally returned to the house, covered in dirt and sweat, Josephine confronted him. "The men say you are digging a trench from the creek." "What are you building?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "A water system. I am going to pipe water directly to the house so you don't have to haul it anymore." Josephine stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You are going to do what? Pipe water to the house?" "I have been reading about it. Some of the big cities back east have water systems now, pipes that bring water right to buildings. I figured if they can do it in New York or Boston, I can do it here on a smaller scale. But that is impossible, the expense alone." "I have the money," he said firmly, "and I have the time. It is not impossible, just difficult. I have already laid most of the pipe. Another few days and I should have it connected." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why would you do this? We barely know each other." Zachary moved closer, his eyes serious. "Because watching you suffer every day is not something I can tolerate. You came here to be my wife, not to destroy what is left of your health hauling water. If I can fix this problem, I am going to fix it." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "No one has ever done anything like this for me." "Well, I am doing it now," he said softly. "So get used to it." 3 days later, Zachary finished the installation. The system was simple but ingenious. He had buried iron pipes from the creek all the way to the house, using the natural downhill slope to create water pressure. At the house, he installed a hand pump in the kitchen that connected to the pipe system. And when Josephine pumped the handle, clean, cold water flowed directly into a basin. She pumped it once, twice, 3 times, watching in amazement as water poured out without her having to walk a single step. Then she started to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Zachary, alarmed, stepped forward. "What is wrong? Does it not work properly?" "It works perfectly," she gasped between sobs. "That is why I am crying. Do you have any idea what this means? I have been hauling water since I was a child, every single day for 14 years, and you just made it so I never have to do it again." He pulled her gently into his arms, careful of her twisted spine, and let her cry against his chest. "You are my wife, Josephine. Taking care of you is my responsibility, and if I am being honest, it is becoming my pleasure too." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes red and swollen. "I do not understand you, Zachary Zimmerman. Most men would have sent me back the moment they saw my condition. Instead, you have been nothing but kind." "Most men are fools," he said simply. "I can see what you are beneath the crooked spine. You are strong and capable and braver than you know. Coming out here to marry a stranger took courage. The least I can do is make sure you have running water." Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. Josephine's health improved dramatically without the daily strain of water hauling. The constant pain in her back eased to a dull ache, and she found she had energy for other tasks. She threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting a small herb garden near the kitchen, and cooking meals that were more elaborate than simple beans and cornbread. Zachary, for his part, found himself looking for excuses to be near her. He would come in from working the cattle and find her in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she kneaded bread dough, and his heart would do something strange in his chest. He started taking his meals slower, lingering at the table to talk with her about everything and nothing. They discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both had lost their parents. Both knew what it was like to work until their hands bled. Both harbored dreams of something more than mere survival. Josephine confessed that she had always wanted to learn to read properly, having only the most basic education. Zachary, who had taught himself to read from his mother's old Bible, offered to teach her. Their evenings became a ritual. After dinner, they would sit together on the porch, and Zachary would read aloud from whatever books he had. Sometimes the Bible, sometimes agricultural journals, sometimes even a novel he had traded for in town. Josephine would follow along, sounding out words, and gradually her confidence grew. One evening in late November, as they sat bundled against the chill air, Josephine read an entire page aloud without stumbling once. When she finished, she looked up at Zachary with such joy that he could not help himself. He leaned over and kissed her, soft and gentle. She froze for a moment, then kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Zachary admitted. "I have wanted you to," Josephine whispered. "I was afraid you might not want me that way." "Because of how I look." "How you look?" Zachary shook his head. "Josephine, when I look at you, I see the bravest woman I have ever met. I see someone who has survived things that would have broken most people. Your spine may be crooked, but your spirit is straight and true. That is what matters to me." She kissed him again, deeper this time, and when they finally went inside, it was to the bedroom they would now share. The physical intimacy between them was tender and patient. Zachary was careful with her, conscious always of her pain, finding positions that would not strain her back. Josephine had worried that her body would revolt, that the act would hurt too much, but in his arms she felt safe and cherished. They learned each other slowly, communicating with touches and whispered words, building a connection that went beyond mere obligation. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing cold rains and occasionally frost. The water system Zachary had built proved its worth over and over. While neighbors struggled with frozen creeks and difficult hauling, Josephine had only to work the hand pump in her warm kitchen. Word spread about Zachary's innovation, and several neighboring ranchers came to examine the system, asking if he could build something similar for them. "You could start a business," Josephine told him one evening as they lay in bed, her head resting on his shoulder. "Building water systems for other ranches. There is clearly demand for it." "Maybe," Zachary mused, "but I am a cattleman, not a plumber. You could be both, she insisted. We could be both. I could help with the planning and the bookkeeping. It would bring in extra money, and it would help other women like me who are breaking their backs hauling water. He considered this, running his fingers through her hair. You really think we could do it? I think we could do anything together, she said firmly. They started small, with Zachary building a system for their nearest neighbor, an older widow who had been struggling to manage her small ranch alone. The job took him a week, and when it was done, the widow paid him generously and told everyone in the valley about his work. More requests came in, and Josephine proved to be an excellent manager, scheduling jobs, ordering supplies, and keeping meticulous records of expenses and income. By spring of 1885, they had built water systems for 6 different properties, and the money was good enough that Zachary was able to hire Miguel and Carlos full-time to help manage the cattle while he focused on the plumbing work. Josephine often rode along to job sites, offering design suggestions and making sure Zachary remembered to eat and rest. The ranch hands teased them good-naturedly about being inseparable, but Zachary did not care. He had discovered that he simply preferred being near his wife. One warm April afternoon, as they were riding back from a job site, Josephine suddenly pulled her horse to a stop. Zachary circled back, concerned. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she said, her voice strange. "I just realized something. My back has not hurt in 3 days." 3 entire days, Zachary. I cannot remember the last time I went even 1 day without pain. He reached over and took her hand. "That is wonderful, Josephine. It is more than wonderful. It is a miracle, and it is all because of you. Because you cared enough to build that water system, my body finally had a chance to heal." Tears sparkled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "You saved me, Zachary. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me too," he said seriously. "Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions of running this ranch without any real purpose beyond survival. You gave me something to work for, someone to build a future with. You made this house a home." They rode back together in comfortable silence, hands linked between their horses, and that night Josephine told him she thought she might be pregnant. Zachary lifted her and spun her around, careful even in his joy not to jar her spine, and when he set her down, he kissed her so thoroughly that they ended up in bed well before sunset. They made love with a new sweetness, conscious of the life potentially growing between them, and afterward they lay tangled together making plans for the future. The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in San Jose a week later, and Josephine bloomed with it. Her cheeks filled out, losing the gaunt hollows that had been there when she first arrived, and her eyes sparkled with happiness. The morning sickness was mild, and her back continued to feel better than it had in years. "I was so worried that pregnancy would make the pain worse," she confided to Zachary one evening. "But I think my body is actually stronger now. All those months of not hauling water let me heal." "You are the strongest woman I know," Zachary said, his hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. "This baby is lucky to have you as a mother." The plumbing business continued to grow throughout the summer. Zachary trained Miguel and Carlos to help with installations, and soon they were able to take on multiple jobs simultaneously. Josephine managed everything from the house, her organizational skills proving invaluable. They began advertising in the San Jose newspaper, and requests came in from as far as 50 miles away. With the extra income, Zachary expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. He installed an even more sophisticated water system, with pipes leading to multiple rooms, including a small bathing room with a tin tub that filled directly from the pipes. It was luxurious beyond anything Josephine had imagined, and she cried happy tears the first time she was able to take a bath without having to haul and heat water first. "You spoil me," she told Zachary as she soaked in the warm water, her swollen belly rising like an island. "You deserve to be spoiled," he replied, sitting on a stool beside the tub. "Besides, I like seeing you happy. It makes me happy." Their son was born in January of 1886, during a winter storm that kept the doctor from reaching the ranch in time. Josephine labored through the night with only Zachary and a neighbor woman to help, and when the baby finally arrived as dawn broke, screaming lustily, Zachary cut the cord with shaking hands. "A boy," the neighbor woman announced, placing the baby on Josephine's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Josephine looked down at her son, tears streaming down her face, and then up at Zachary, who was also crying. "We made this," she whispered. "We made something perfect." They named him Samuel after Zachary's father, and he was indeed perfect, with a strong pair of lungs and his mother's dark eyes. Zachary proved to be a devoted father, taking over many of the household chores so Josephine could rest and nurse the baby. He would wake in the night to change Samuel's diapers, singing soft cowboy songs to soothe him back to sleep. And during the day, he would work with the baby strapped to his chest, showing him the ranch that would one day be his. Josephine recovered from the birth more quickly than anyone expected, her body resilient in ways it had never been when she was constantly straining it with water hauling. Within a month, she was back to managing the business, though now she did so with Samuel sleeping in a cradle beside her desk. The business continued to thrive. By the spring of 1886, they had built water systems for more than 30 properties across the valley, and Zachary was being called an innovator and a genius. Newspaper articles were written about the cowboy who was revolutionizing ranch life with his plumbing systems, and entrepreneurs from San Francisco came to talk to him about expanding the business into a larger operation. "We could move to the city," one of them suggested during a meeting at the ranch. "Start a company, hire teams of installers, build systems for city buildings. You could be a very wealthy man, Mr. Zimmerman." Zachary looked at Josephine, who sat beside him with Samuel on her lap, and then back at the entrepreneur. "Thank you for the offer, but I am already wealthy. I have a ranch I love, work that matters, and a family that means everything to me. I do not need anything more than that." After the man left, Josephine kissed Zachary's cheek. "You could have been rich." "I am rich," he insisted, "just not in the way he meant." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, the plumbing business remained steady, and Samuel grew into a cheerful toddler who loved following his father around and playing in the dirt. Zachary taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, placing him on a gentle mare and walking alongside to make sure he did not fall. Josephine's health continued to improve. While her spine would never straighten completely, the chronic pain that had plagued her for so many years faded to occasional twinges. She could work in her garden for hours without suffering, could lift her son without fear, could dance with her husband in the kitchen while dinner cooked on the stove. "I feel like a different person than the woman who stepped off that stagecoach," she told Zachary one evening as they watched Samuel sleep. "That woman was broken and hopeless. Now I am whole." "You were always whole," Zachary corrected gently. "You just needed someone to see it." In the fall of 1887, Josephine became pregnant again, and this time the experience was even easier. She worked throughout the pregnancy, managing the business and caring for Samuel, and when her labor began in May of 1888, it was quick and uncomplicated. Their daughter arrived in the early morning, smaller than Samuel had been but just as healthy, with Zachary's light brown hair and a temper that made itself known immediately. They named her Rose, and she completed their family in ways they had not expected. Samuel adored his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. Zachary built a larger cradle that could be moved from room to room, and Josephine marveled at how full her life had become. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real," she confessed to Zachary one night as they lay in bed, exhausted but content. "I went from having nothing and no one to having everything I could ever want." "We built this together," Zachary reminded her. "Every bit of it. From that first water pipe to these two perfect children. We are partners, Josephine, in every sense of the word." The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The plumbing business eventually grew so large that Zachary had to hire additional workers and open a small office in San Jose. Miguel took over as foreman of the installation crews, with Carlos managing the ranch full-time. The money allowed them to buy additional land, expanding their holdings to over 1,000 acres, making them one of the more prosperous families in the valley. But prosperity did not change them. Zachary remained the same hard-working, devoted husband he had always been, and Josephine never forgot where she had come from. She made it a point to help other women in the valley, particularly those struggling with difficult circumstances. When she heard of a widow struggling to maintain her farm, she would send Zachary to install a water system at cost. When a family fell on hard times, she would hire them for odd jobs around the ranch, paying generously. "You have a soft heart," Zachary teased her after she had hired yet another struggling family to help with the harvest. "I remember what it was like to be desperate," she said simply. "If we can help, we should." Samuel grew into a strong, capable boy who showed early promise as both a rancher and an engineer. He would follow his father on jobs, asking endless questions about how the water systems worked, and by the time he was 10, he could help with simple installations. Rose, meanwhile, proved to have her mother's head for business, keeping meticulous records of her allowance and negotiating with her brother over trades and favors with a shrewdness that made both parents laugh. In 1892, when Samuel was 6 and Rose was 4, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and the doctor advised her to rest as much as possible. Zachary immediately scaled back his work, spending more time at home to help with the children and the household. He hired additional help, including a young woman from town to assist with cooking and cleaning, so Josephine could focus on staying healthy. Their third child, another son they named Thomas, arrived in early 1893 after a difficult labor that left Josephine weak for weeks afterward. But she recovered, aided by Zachary's devoted care and the children's determination to help their mother feel better. Samuel would read to her from her favorite books, Rose would bring her wildflowers from the fields, and Thomas was a contented baby who rarely fussed. 3 children, Josephine marveled one afternoon as she watched them play in the yard. "I have 3 children, a husband who loves me, a beautiful home, and work that matters. How did I get so lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," Zachary said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, careful as always of her back. "You took a chance on a stranger and a new life. You worked hard, you loved deeply, and you built something amazing. That is not luck, darling. That is you." The turn of the century found the Zimmerman family thriving. The ranch was profitable, the plumbing business was now known throughout California, and their children were healthy and happy. Zachary was recognized as a pioneer in rural water systems, and he had been invited to speak at conferences and write articles about his innovations. He always credited Josephine in these talks, explaining that his motivation had been to help his wife, that love had driven innovation. Josephine had become a respected figure in the community as well, known for her charitable work and her business acumen. She served on the boards of several local organizations, advocating for better conditions for women and children, and she had established a small fund to help mail-order brides who arrived in California and found themselves in difficult situations. "I was lucky that you were a good man," she told the women who came to her for help. "Not everyone is so fortunate. If your husband is cruel or dangerous, you have options. Do not think you have to stay just because you traveled so far." On their 10th wedding anniversary in October 1894, Zachary surprised Josephine with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Miguel and his wife, who had married a few years earlier and lived in a cottage on the ranch property, and took the train to the city for a week of luxury and adventure. It was Josephine's first time in a big city, and she was overwhelmed by the noise, the crowds, and the towering buildings. But Zachary guided her through it all, showing her theaters and restaurants, museums, and parks. They stayed in a fancy hotel with actual indoor plumbing, which Zachary examined with professional interest, making notes about techniques he might incorporate into his own designs. On their last night in the city, they attended the opera. Josephine wore a new dress that Zachary had bought for her, deep blue silk that made her eyes shine, and he wore a proper suit that made him look like a city gentleman rather than a cowboy. As they sat in the plush seats watching the performance, Josephine reached over and took his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of this, for everything." "You never have to thank me," he whispered back. "Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." When they returned to the ranch, the children mobbed them with hugs and stories about their adventures while their parents were away. Samuel had helped Carlos repair a fence, Rose had learned to churn butter, and Thomas had taken his first steps. The house was chaotic and loud and perfect, and Josephine thought she had never been happier. The years continued to roll forward, bringing changes and challenges, but always underlaid with the solid foundation of love and partnership that Josephine and Zachary had built. The children grew, the business evolved, and the ranch expanded. They weathered droughts and market downturns, celebrated births and mourned deaths, built friendships and maintained family bonds. Through it all, Zachary's water system remained the physical symbol of what they had created together. Every time Josephine used the pump in the kitchen, every time she filled the bathtub, every time she watered her garden from the taps Zachary had installed, she was reminded of the man who had seen her suffering and moved heaven and earth to end it. "You ever regret it?" she asked him one evening in 1899, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. They were both older now, with lines around their eyes and silver threading through their hair, but they still sat close together, still held hands like newlyweds. Marrying a mail-order bride with a crooked spine. Zachary turned to look at her, his eyes soft. "I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Zimmerman, crooked spine and all." She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, sunshine and leather and home. "You know what the miracle is? My spine is still crooked. It will always be crooked. But it does not hurt anymore. Not because you fixed my spine, but because you fixed everything around it. You made it so I could live without pain, without breaking myself, just to survive. That is love, Zachary. Real, true love." "Well then, we are both lucky," he said, kissing the top of her head, "because I feel just as loved as you do." As the new century dawned, the Zimmerman family stood as proof that love could transform lives, that compassion could drive innovation, and that sometimes the best partnerships were built not on perfection, but on seeing past imperfections to the perfect soul beneath. Josephine's crooked spine had brought her pain and hardship for years, but it had also brought her to Zachary, and he had loved her enough to change the world for her, one pipe at a time. Samuel, now a young man of 14, had taken over much of the day-to-day operations of the plumbing business, showing a natural talent for engineering that surpassed even his father's. Rose, at 12, was already helping her mother manage the business accounts with precision and care. Thomas, at 7, was still finding his way, but he showed signs of inheriting his father's compassion and his mother's determination. "We have built something that will last," Josephine said one evening as she and Zachary reviewed the year's finances. The business had installed water systems in over 200 properties across California, and they employed 15 full-time workers. The ranch ran smoothly under Carlos's management, and they were planning to purchase additional land in the spring. "We have built more than a business," Zachary corrected. "We have built a legacy. These water systems, they are helping women all over California. Every wife who does not have to haul water, every mother who has energy left at the end of the day to spend with her children, every woman whose body is not breaking from labor, that is because of what we started, because of what you inspired." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 15 years of marriage, Zachary still had the power to move her with his words. "I inspired nothing. I was just a broken woman who needed help." "You were never broken," he said firmly, a conversation they had had many times before but one that never grew old. "You were bent by circumstance, but never broken. And you helped me see that sometimes the old ways of doing things are not the best ways. That innovation is born from compassion. That love can literally move mountains, or at least move water uphill through pipes." They laughed together, and the sound carried through the house, causing the children to look up from their various activities and smile. This was home, this warmth and laughter and love. This was what they had built from a simple exchange of letters between strangers, from a mail-order bride with a crooked spine, and a cowboy willing to pipe water to his house. In the spring of 1901, disaster struck in the form of a fire that swept through the valley, consuming dry grass and threatening several ranches. The Zimmerman property was in the path of the blaze, and Zachary organized the neighbors to fight it. Using the water systems he had installed on various properties, they were able to create fire breaks and wet down structures, saving most of the buildings in the area. The Zimmerman ranch suffered some damage to the outlying fields, but the house and barn were saved, thanks in large part to the elaborate water system that allowed them to soak everything thoroughly. Other ranchers were not so lucky, and in the aftermath, Josephine opened their home to families who had lost everything. "We have room," she told Zachary when he worried about the strain, "and we have resources. How can we not help?" For 3 months, they housed and fed 2 families who had lost their homes to the fire. Josephine organized the community to donate clothing and supplies, and Zachary helped the men rebuild, often donating materials and labor at no cost. When the families were finally able to move back to their rebuilt homes, they wept with gratitude. "You have saved us," one of the women told Josephine. "We would have had to leave California entirely if not for your generosity." "We help because we can," Josephine said simply. "And because we remember what it is like to need help." The incident reinforced the Zimmerman family's standing in the community. They were not just successful ranchers and business people. They were good neighbors and generous souls. Their children learned by example, growing up with a strong sense of responsibility to use their advantages to help others. By 1905, Samuel had taken over the plumbing business entirely, freeing Zachary to focus on the ranch and on new innovations. He had begun experimenting with irrigation systems, using his knowledge of water management to help farmers increase their crop yields. Rose had married a young lawyer from San Jose, a kind man who treated her with respect and supported her continued involvement in the family business. Thomas was showing an interest in medicine, and Zachary and Josephine were setting aside money to send him to university. "Our children have turned out well," Josephine remarked one evening as she and Zachary walked through their land, a ritual they had maintained for years. She was 53 now and he was 57, both of them slowing down but still healthy and active. "They had good examples," Zachary said, squeezing her hand. "They had love," Josephine corrected. "That is the most important thing we gave them. Not money or education or opportunity, but the knowledge that they are loved unconditionally. That is what makes good people." In 1908, Rose gave birth to Josephine and Zachary's first grandchild, a girl they named Josephine after her grandmother. Holding the baby for the first time, Josephine wept with joy, thinking of how far she had come from that desperate young woman stepping off the stagecoach. She had not only survived, she had thrived. She had built a life of meaning and purpose, had raised children and helped build a business that improved lives, had loved and been loved in return. "What are you thinking?" Zachary asked, watching her cradle their granddaughter. "I am thinking about water," she said with a soft laugh. "About how something as simple as not having to haul it changed everything. About how your kindness gave me a chance to heal, and that healing allowed me to become the person I was meant to be. About how love is like water, essential and life-giving and capable of carving new paths through the hardest stone." Zachary kissed her forehead, his eyes bright with emotion. "You always were the poetic one. And you were always the practical one," she teased. "Together we make a good team." "The best team," he agreed. They spent the afternoon with Rose and her family, marveling at the baby and discussing plans for the future. Samuel stopped by with his new fiancée, a bright young woman who worked as a teacher in San Jose. Thomas was away at university, but would be home for the holidays. The house was full of family and laughter, and Josephine thought about how empty it had seemed when she first arrived. "You have filled my life," she told Zachary that night as they prepared for bed. "In ways I never imagined possible. We filled each other's lives," he said, pulling her close. "That is what marriage is supposed to be. Not one person completing the other, but two whole people choosing to build something bigger than themselves." The years continued their relentless march forward. Samuel married and had 3 children of his own. Rose had 2 more babies, both boys. Thomas graduated from medical school and opened a practice in San Jose, specializing in helping the poor and working-class families who could not afford expensive doctors. All 3 children credited their parents with teaching them the importance of using their gifts to serve others. In 1915, Zachary and Josephine celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and warm in heart. The ranch was run by Samuel and his sons. The plumbing business had expanded into a full-scale engineering firm, and their descendants numbered 15 and counting. 31 years, Josephine marveled as they sat on the porch, the same porch where they had courted and dreamed and built their future. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 31 years of my life," Zachary said, his voice rougher with age but still full of love. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" she asked. "When I got off that stagecoach and you saw my crooked spine." "I remember thinking you looked exhausted and in pain," he said honestly. "And I remember feeling like I had to help you, even before I knew you. Something in me just responded to your need. I thought you would send me back," she admitted. "I thought once you saw how damaged I was, you would not want me." "Damaged?" Zachary shook his head. You were never damaged, my love. You were a survivor. You still are. And I was honored then, and am honored now, to be your husband." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades. In the distance, they could hear the voices of their grandchildren playing, could see the lights coming on in the houses that dotted their property. They had built all of this, starting from nothing but hope and hard work and love. "The water still flows," Josephine said softly, referring to the system Zachary had built so many years ago. It had been maintained and updated over the years, but the core of it remained the same, pipes running from the creek to the house, delivering life-sustaining water with the simple turn of a tap. "Some things are built to last," Zachary said, and they both knew he was not just talking about pipes. In the spring of 1918, Zachary fell ill with pneumonia. Josephine nursed him with the same devotion he had shown her throughout their marriage, sitting by his bedside, reading to him, holding his hand through the fever and chills. Thomas used all his medical skill to help his father, and for a while, it seemed Zachary would recover. But on a warm May morning, with Josephine holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed, Zachary Zimmerman passed peacefully into death. His last words were for his wife. "Thank you for saying yes." Josephine was devastated. They had been partners for 34 years, and his absence left a hole in her life that nothing could fill. She moved through the funeral in a daze, accepting condolences from what seemed like the entire valley. Everyone had a story about Zachary's kindness, his ingenuity, his generosity. "He changed this valley," one old rancher told her, "made life easier for all of us, but especially for our wives. There is not a woman here who does not bless his name every time she gets water from her tap." In the months after Zachary's death, Josephine struggled to find her footing. The children were attentive, the grandchildren offered distraction, but nothing could replace the man who had been her partner in everything. She wandered the ranch alone, remembering conversations and moments, seeing his ghost in every corner. It was the water system that finally brought her comfort. She stood in the kitchen one afternoon, pumping the handle, watching the water flow into the basin, and she felt Zachary's presence so strongly it was as if he stood beside her. "You are still taking care of me," she whispered. "Even now, you are still making sure I do not have to haul water." She placed her hand on the pump, feeling the cool metal beneath her palm, and she made a decision. She would not waste the years she had left in grief. Zachary had given her a life free from pain, had shown her what love could build, and she would honor that by living fully, by continuing to help others, by making sure his legacy endured. Over the next few years, Josephine threw herself into charitable work. She established a foundation in Zachary's name that provided water systems to poor families throughout California. She worked with Thomas on public health initiatives, connecting access to clean water with improvements in community health. She helped Rose expand the engineering business to include projects in other states. She also wrote. Using the reading and writing skills Zachary had taught her, she penned a memoir about their life together, about how a mail-order bride with a crooked spine had found love with a cowboy who piped water to the house. The book was published in 1922 and became a surprise success, with women across the country writing to her about their own struggles and triumphs. "Your story gave me hope," one woman wrote. "It showed me that physical limitations do not have to limit a full life, that there are good men in the world, and that love really can change everything." Josephine answered every letter personally, sharing what wisdom she had gained over her 70-plus years. She encouraged women to seek partners who saw their worth, to never settle for less than they deserved, to remember that they were valuable regardless of what their bodies could or could not do. In 1925, at the age of 73, Josephine Crawford Zimmerman passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried next to Zachary on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a simple headstone that read, "Partners in life, united in death, forever bound by love." Their children and grandchildren mourned her deeply, but celebrated her life with stories and laughter. They gathered at the ranch for a memorial service, and Samuel gave a eulogy that captured the essence of his mother's impact. "My mother came to California broken in body but strong in spirit," he said. "She married a stranger and built with him a legacy that extends far beyond this ranch or our family. Together, my parents showed us that love is not passive but active, that it builds and creates and improves. My father piped water to the house because he could not bear to see my mother suffer. That simple act of love changed her life and through her, changed countless other lives." He gestured to the land around them, to the water system that still functioned perfectly after more than 40 years, to the family gathered to remember. This is their legacy. Not just the business or the ranch, but the principle that love should make life easier, not harder, that we should use our gifts to serve others, that no one is beyond help or hope. The family continued to prosper in the years that followed. The engineering firm became one of the largest in California, specializing in water management and public works. The ranch remained in the family, managed by successive generations who honored their ancestors' commitment to the land. The charitable foundation established in Zachary's name brought clean water to thousands of families. But more than any material success, Zachary and Josephine's true legacy was in the love they had shared and the example they had set. Their story became legend in the valley, passed down through generations. The tale of a mail-order bride with a crooked spine, and the cowboy who loved her enough to move water through pipes so she would never have to suffer again. In the end, what had begun as a practical solution to a physical problem had become a love story for the ages. Zachary had seen Josephine's pain and refused to accept it as inevitable. He had used his skills and resources to change her life, and in doing so, had changed his own. Together, they had built not just a water system or a business or a ranch, but a family bound by love, a community enriched by their generosity, and a legacy that would endure for generations. The water still flowed through the pipes Zachary had laid, clear and cold and constant, a testament to one man's love for his wife and the remarkable life they had built together. Every drop was a reminder that the simplest acts of kindness can have the most profound consequences, that love is measured not in words but in deeds, and that sometimes the best way to love someone is to ease their burden and give them the chance to bloom. And in that house in San Jose, California, where a cowboy had once piped water so his bride would not have to haul it, the tap still ran, delivering life and love with every turn of the handle, just as Zachary had intended when he first picked up a shovel and decided that his wife's suffering would end, one pipe at a time.